The mud beneath his feet sucked in a little more with each step, but he couldn't take his eyes off it. His eyes were locked on a tiny creature about to drown in the water. It was a lion cub, drenched, shivering, almost submerged. But what really froze him was the moment he locked eyes with it. The cub's eyes were looking at him. No, not just looking. It was screaming for help with its eyes. Silently, wordlessly, only with his eyes. That scream went unheard, but it shattered him inside. And the man, John, was pinned to the ground. This could have been a wild animal. But right in front of his eyes, a lion cub hung between life and death. The rain poured down in torrents. The sky had turned a leaden gray. The wind was blowing the water into his eyes, but John didn't move. For a second, time stood still. The water was murky, rushing, and the cub was being swept away with each passing second. His tiny body was almost invisible in the waves, but his eyes were still locked on John, as if to say, "You saw me. Don't leave me now." And that's when something snapped inside him. This was not just an animal. This was the memory of his little brother who had drowned in front of him years before. John was small then, helpless. He couldn't reach out. But now he could do something. He put his foot forward, and then another step. He ignored the voice behind him. "John, stop." Mwangi was shouting. "It's a lion cub. It could attack. He could kill us." But John's mind was elsewhere. He had a life ahead of him, and this life could heal the deepest wound in his past. Everything was calm until a few minutes ago. John and Mwangi were patrolling the Masai Mara game reserve. The rain had just started, but now there was water everywhere. A small stream had turned into a raging river. As he struggled through the mud, he was suddenly confronted with this image: a drowning lion cub struggling in the water, and a lioness with her ears pinned back, pacing back and forth in desperation on the shore. In that moment, everything seemed surreal. The mother lioness was trying to reach her cub, but she was unable to go deeper into the water and was pounding the ground with her claws. Her cry tore the sky, and the wind carried her wail. To see that an animal could suffer so deeply was powerful enough to strike at the heart of the viewer. A single sentence echoed in John's brain: "If you're late, you'll never make it up to me again." He grabbed the sile, wrapped it around his waist, and fixed his eyes on Mwangi. "Get ready," he said. "I'm going in." Mwangi didn't know what to say. She had never seen anything like it. The man in front of him seemed to have gone mad in the rain, but his eyes shone with sheer determination. When John entered the water, the knee-deep current suddenly reached his waist. The cold dazzled his teeth, but he did not give up. Each step brought him closer to the cub. Mwangi had the tip of the sile. He was ready to pull her in, but the real battle began now. The water surrounded him, pushing, pulling him back, as if it wanted to swallow him too. But John was undaunted. This was not just a rescue for him. This was also a rescue of his shame, guilt, and helplessness. The baby was almost motionless in the water now. Its eyes were still open, but they were closing from exhaustion. John reached out his hand. For a moment, he couldn't hold on. He tried again. This time, he grabbed it. He took the tiny body under his arm. "Now," he shouted. Mwangi began to pull on the rope. With each pull, John got a little closer to the shore. The water was still rushing madly, but his hands did not relax. His heart was beating as if it wasn't his own. Everyone who was watching this moment, got closer to the screen. Because this was no longer a wildlife rescue. We were in the middle of a man's battle with his inner trauma. When he reached the shore, his knees buckled. His back was hunched, his breath ragged. In his arms was an unconscious cub. But she was alive. His chest was rising and falling. Mwangi rushed to him, her eyes asking, "Are you okay?" But John could only nod. They both turned their eyes to the cub. Then, in the silence, a shadow approached, the mother lion. Her eyes locked with John's. Her claws dug into the ground. Her muscles tensed. But she didn't attack. It came closer. Slowly. She turned her eyes to her cub. She sniffed, licked it. Then she looked again. That look created a bond beyond words. It wasn't a threat, but a thank you. At that moment, everyone watching got a lump in their throat. Because this was not only the reunion of an animal with its cub, but also a silent reflection of the deepest emotion of a mother. As the mother lion took her cub away, the little cub stopped for a moment. It turned its head. It looked at John. For a long time, those eyes were still not full of fear. They were trusting. And in that moment, John began to forgive himself for the first time. For the audience, this story was much more than a rescue story. It was a story of connection. An invisible but unbreakable bond between man and animal, between past and present, between guilt and hope. And the real question has yet to be fully answered. Why was this cub alone? Why had its mother abandoned her pack? In fact, this story did not end here. This was only the beginning. Because first of all, this is not just a lion-cub rescue story. This is the story of a silent window opened in the heart. And there was so much more behind that window. So much more. The sun didn't rise that morning. Or if it did, no one noticed. In a remote corner of the Masai Mara, in a valley where trees lean against each other and vines cover the sky, a young lioness opened her eyes. But not peacefully. She was tired, exhausted, and alert. There was a tiny warmth under her breast, a cub whose eyes weren't even open yet. The more it stirred, the more it purred, the more it snuggled into its mother's warmth. The mother lion had just brought her cub into the world, but she couldn't rejoice. Because she was alone. And loneliness, in the jungle, was synonymous with death. No one ever sees a lioness raising a cub alone. Because nature is harsh. Because the chances of a lion cub surviving, even with its mother by its side, are less than 50%. And because other lions, especially males, see these cubs as a threat. But this mother couldn't do anything else. Because this was not her first cub. And she had lost her first one. Her first one very badly. Let's go back a few months. When she hadn't yet given birth, she was in a pack. It was a large, active, strong group. Prey was plentiful, shade was plentiful. But the threats always come from within. Especially when it comes to newborns. The alpha male in the pack often refused to accept new cubs. The logic of whoever owns the female, owns the cub, didn't work. If he's not sure who he's mated with, or if she hasn't shown loyalty to him, he'll reject the cub. Even kill it. Yes, horrible but true. That's how ruthless force in nature can be. This mother experienced that terrible moment in her first birth. She licked her baby into the world. He hadn't even stood up yet. And then, that horrible, horrible noise. The male lion approached, sniffed, examined, and it was over in seconds. He tore the cub to pieces. The mother collapsed on the ground covered in blood, baring her teeth and screaming. But to no avail, she had not forgotten that day. She couldn't forget it. Every time it rains, every time there is thunder, that image flashes before her eyes. That's why, when his stomach swelled up for the second time, he felt a sense of dread. And he made a decision. This time he would trust no one. Not her pack, not the rules, not nature. If she wanted to keep this cub alive, she had to be alone. If she wanted to protect it, she had to go where no one knew. Because a mother lion will defy the sky for her cub, she quietly left the pride in the middle of the night. She didn't look back. Her back ached, her stomach was heavy, but she walked. She trampled the grass. He crossed thorns. He jumped over a rock. And he reached a valley that no one would ever enter. It was sheltered, but food was hard to find. The water source was far away. Still, he decided to stay. That was the bargain she made with solitude. If you want to protect your cub, you give up comfort. Days passed. The birth took place. It was quiet. It was painful. But finally, a tiny mass attached itself to her body. Her fur was thin. Her ears were still not closed. His eyes were hazy. But he was alive. The mother repeated it to herself. This time, I won't let you. This time, you will live. Raising the cub alone was not as easy as described. It was necessary to hunt during the day, but it was impossible to find a safe place to leave the cub. At night, it was even more dangerous. Jackals, hyenas, snakes, they were all a threat. That's why the mother lion never got a full night's sleep. Her eyes were always open. Her ears flinched at the slightest sound. If the cub hiccuped, she would wake up and crawl on top of it. Not once did she relax. Not once did she sigh. Because to survive, the mother had no right to sleep. One day, the cub walked for the first time. Trembling, unsteadily, but it walked. For the first time, the mother saw hope in its eyes. She licked it. She took him to her breast. And she thought, maybe we can make it. Maybe, but nature loves to mock hope. When the thunder rumbled, the little stream overflowed with the waters that awoke beneath the earth. And felt it. That day she did not go far away to hunt. She took her cub with her. She didn't go to the water's edge. But the cub was growing. She was curious. She went closer to the water. He played with it. It was ridiculous. It was funny. But then the moment came. When the mother lion closed her eyes, she still saw that moment. The moment when the cub lost his balance. Falling into the water, his head buried in the mud. The struggle, her silent scream, the slip of its claws, and the cursed moment when he himself froze on the riverbank. He had run, but it was too late. Her fur stood on end. Her pupils dilated. She scraped the ground with her claws, but the water was relentless. Like the male who had taken his first cub, it had come for him. That's why, when John's silhouette in the water first appeared to her, she didn't want to attack. But she was afraid, too. Because humans can be dangerous, too. People kill animals. They put them in cages. But that man, he was going into the water. Without fear. Quickly. That man was pulling her cub out of the water. She couldn't make sense of it. She tried to squint her eyes. She moved her ears. A foreign odor came to her nose. But it wasn't danger. It smelled of sweat and rain and worry. Then he watched him. The man brought his baby to the shore. He held it in his hands and laid it on the ground. The cub was still, but alive. The mother's heart seemed to stop. She ran, but she didn't attack. Her eyes locked on his eyes. There was no fear in that man's eyes, but something else. He looked like a child afraid of losing. And the mother lion thanked him. Silently. With her eyes. With her heart. Everyone held their breath at that moment. Because on the one hand there was wild nature, on the other a pure bond. Why was this mother alone? Why was this cub so important? And this man? Why was he so brave? The cub had been rescued, but was the danger over? Why did the mother lion follow them? And most importantly, was this mother really alone? Or was she running away from what she had lost in the past? The answers, in a moment. But for now, there was only a moment of silence. And in that silence, a mother lioness was sniffing her cub. And for the first time, she felt truly safe. But nature never remains silent forever. And now the real storm was coming. When the scent of rain mixes with the earth, some animals change their positions. Some run like mad, others retreat to their corners. But the lions, they wait. They know the patience of the earth and the anger of the sky. But this time, deep in the Masai Mara, waiting would not be enough. Because the sky wasn't just crying. It was shouting. The air was different that morning. The silence was like a pause before the scream. The mother lion woke up, cuddled up to her cub. She was pressing it to her chest. Dark gray clouds rose over the horizon. Birds had changed direction. Insects were hiding. It was nature's instinctive alarm system. And he had picked up every signal. But it was too late to leave. The rain had already started. The first drops were light when they touched the ground. But in a few minutes the sky emptied like a river. It wasn't just rain. It was as if all the water in the universe was pouring down on the earth. The mother lion carried her cub under the cave-like rock. She tried to dry her cub with her soaked fur. But there was not much she could do. The wind rushed from one side and the water from the other. And the cub, it was the first time he had ever seen so much rain that he was curious. He was only a few weeks old, but the sense of discovery inside him was an unquenchable fire. There was water outside. There was sound. There was movement. There was play. No matter how hard the mother pushed, the cub's paws crawled forward. Every few seconds, it stuck its nose out and watched the drops fall. Each drop was a different toy for her. The mother knew how deadly this game was. For a while the rain eased, and thought this was her chance. She had to go and get something to eat. For days they had gnawed only a few insects and an old carcass. Hunger was sapping the cub's energy. He saw the moment when the rain calmed down as a chance. Maybe he could hunt a few hundred meters away, behind the high cliffs, and get back as soon as possible. But this was his biggest mistake. The cub went out. His steps were quick. The grass was slippery, but he did not fall. He didn't even notice that the rain had started again. It was as if the world was his playground. He jumped in the water that mixed with the mud. He chased a frog that squirted out of a puddle. He watched a small piece of wood drift into the river. And, at that moment, he was so intrigued by that piece of wood. He put a paw in the water to catch the little piece of wood. But the water was lurking. As soon as he touched the wood, he slipped. First he stumbled slightly. Then his body went completely forward. One paw hung in the grass, but it was no use. He lost his balance on the sliding ground, and his tiny body sank into the water. His eyes opened. Water filled his nose, cutting off his breath. She wanted to scream, but her mouth was full of mud. The water was rapidly pulling her body down. The game was over at that moment. Everyone was in that baby's shoes. He feels the water. He can't breathe. He visualizes those tiny feathers getting heavier, the paws unable to resist the water. The puppy's eyes turn to the sky once. Then it closes them. The mother lion was returning at that moment. She hadn't hunted. She had no scent. It was as if all the prey had disappeared. All she could think of was her cub. She turned back. She took running steps towards the valley. She searched for her cub with her eyes. But the rock was empty. Her heart skipped a beat. Within seconds, goosebumps rose on her skin. She ran. She put her nose close to the ground. He searched for her scent. And he found it. At the water's edge. Footprints and slippery mud. The cry of a mother lion splits the wind, pierces the sky, and echoes through nature. This cry was so powerful that it was heard for miles around. At the same time, John and Mwangi, patrolling the area, heard it. At first, they couldn't understand what it was. It sounded like an engine. But then, it came again. Louder, sharper, and full of pain. John swerved to the right. He drove the car across the muddy path. The rear tire skidded. Mwangi picked up the radio, but he couldn't speak. Because with his eyes he saw a silhouette at the end of the road, at the water's edge, struggling. Small, brown, sunk in the mud. And next to it, a giant body, roaring, clawing at the ground. A lioness with eyes like blood, but not aggressive. It was desperate. John stopped the car. He opened the door. He squinted. In that moment, suddenly, all the voices in his past were silenced. Only the image remained, a lion cub about to drown and a screaming mother. He had to act. This was the moment. Even if he couldn't change his past, he could do something today. But there was something everyone didn't know. This wasn't just a crisis brought on by the rain. This was not nature's revenge. This was a test. A mother's patience, a child's hope, and a man's courage were being tested. And each choice affected the other. The sky stopped for a moment. The rain slowed. The baby was slowly sinking in the water. The mother was struggling, but she couldn't get in. And John took his salini. He wrapped it around his waist. His eyes turned to Mwangi. "Get ready to pull," he said. And he went in. And at that moment, the sky opened up again. And the real storm was about to begin. The body in the water was now motionless. A small, shaky body, covered in mud, eyes half closed. Its claws had long since stopped flapping. A few meters away from the riverbank, in the middle of the waves, the cub was now a weight that did not resist the current. It was as if nature had not forgotten him, had not forgiven him. The sky growled, the wind howled in the treetops. And right on the shore, among the thorns, there was a body stuck in the ground, the mother lion. She did not take her eyes off her cub. She could neither go forward nor backward. She could neither dive into the water with her claws nor avert her gaze. A life was going before her eyes, and she could only scream. It was a scream that came not from the throat, but from the body, from the internal organs. It was the last sound a living creature makes as it loses its other half. The ground beneath John's feet was slippery. The mud was up to his knees. Soil was around his waist, but his mind was still. His eyes were fixed. His ears heard the wind, but he didn't understand. At that moment, something snapped inside him. Images overlapped. That river, that little boy, that scream, and then silence. It had happened years ago. He was only 8 years old when he lost his brother in the water. A little body whose name he barely remembered. He couldn't run that day. She was scared. Her little feet didn't dare enter the water. She could only watch the screams. But now her feet moved. She didn't know what she thought when she took the first step. Maybe nothing. Maybe he thought only of the legs instead. Because the mind was still frozen, but the body was moving. "Mwangi," he shouted. "Get ready to hold on. I'm leaving." Mwangi asked nothing. He wrapped his hand around the end of the sile. He bowed his head. Her eyes were not on John's, but on the cub swirling in the water. There was no time. The time to decide was over. Now it was either move or a life, never to return. John took the first step. The mud came up to his knees. On the second step, his left leg slipped. He didn't fall. It didn't turn. When he took the third step, he was waist-deep in water. The current was strong. Where the river narrowed, the current was faster than normal. From the surface, the water looked calm, but there was a pulling force from the inside. And John recognized it immediately. The water was full underneath. Twigs, stones, mud, broken branches. Everything was mixed in. But he didn't stop. He moved forward with his arms outstretched, as if trying to balance. His eyes were fixed, locked on the cub. No, on her past, or rather on both. He pushed through the water with his chest. When he lifted his face, the wind was blowing water into his eyes. It was hard to breathe. But the breath inside him, the conscience inside him, was breathing deeper than this struggle. As he approached the pup, he realized it was motionless. The waves were pushing it this way and that, but there was no reaction. The sight cut John's heart like a knife. "No," he said in a whisper. "No, not yet. Not yet." Sile was tense. Mwangi was on the shore, following every step. She didn't blink. John reached for the cub. He couldn't hold it at first. His claw slipped from his hand. The water intervened. He reached out again. This time he caught it. His body was slippery and cold, but he was alive. There was breath. Faint but there. The heart. Yes, a beat could be felt under his chest. "Okay," John said to himself. "Okay, you're here." But now it was time to turn back. The water was more rough. It was harder to stay balanced with the cub in his arms. He crawled forward, not standing, but half lying down. "Mwangi," he shouted. "Pull. Now." Sile tensed. John took another step. The water was deeper. It was up to his chest. His arms were shaking, but the tension of the sile gave him a direction. Mwangi was pulling with all his might. With every inch, John was getting closer to the shore. He held the cub tight. He put his arm around her. He would not let go, no matter what. The water filled his mouth. For a moment, his eyes glazed over. But she didn't let go, because to let go would be to lose not only the baby, but her own childhood. And then, a hand, a knee, a shoulder, reached the shore. The first thing he did when he hit the ground was to gently put the cub down. He put its ears against his chest. He patted it on the back. The cub didn't move for a moment. Then, a slight cough. Then a shaky breath. The eyelids opened. The gaze was blurry, but alive. It was alive. Tears welled up in John's eyes. He didn't realize it. He didn't feel the pain in his body. He only felt the warmth. The baby's chest touching his own. He felt that little heart beating. And that heart was beating for him. That moment a shadow approached. A giant shadow, walking with its back arched, its steps heavy but determined. The mother lion. Her eyes locked on John. Mwangi could not move. Keeping her hand on the sile, she held her breath. With one move, everything could change. But the mother just moved closer. Her eyes lowered to her baby. She stretched out her nose. She sniffed. Then she looked at John. For a long time, and she didn't do anything. He just looked. John felt something in that look. Something that can't be put into words. A thank you. An acceptance. Forgiveness, perhaps. The mother pushed her baby with her nose. The little body leaned against her. And then, they started walking together. Slowly. Through the mud. Through the grass, far away. John just sank to the ground. He pulled his knees to his stomach. He put his hands over his eyes. And for the first time, he really cried. And perhaps for the first time, the burden of a boy who had been unforgiven in the past was a little lighter. But the story wasn't over. Because the sky was still closed. And nature was never completely calm. John was still kneeling on the shore when the mother lion began to move away. The water was slowly draining from his body, but the weight inside him would not go away. The sky had cleared a little, the rain had stopped, but the clouds were still in the sky. Like a gray curtain. It was as if nature didn't want to cover up what had just happened, wanted the impact of that scene to last. The mother kept walking, gently nudging her baby with her nose. But something was different. The cub stopped after a few steps. She turned and looked. They locked eyes. In that moment, time froze. There was a connection between them that could not be put into words. No human voice, no animal roar, could describe what that look said. John raised his hand slightly. His wet fingers trembled. "Go," he said in a whisper. "You're safe now." His eyes were full. The cub turned its head and ran to its mother. As they both slowly disappeared over the horizon, a flock of birds rose into the sky. But as in every story, just when you think it's all over, life sends a second wave. John tried to stand up. His knees gave out. Mwangi immediately put his shoulder. "Come on, man, let's go." "It's all right now," he said. But as soon as John took a step, he stopped. His eyes narrowed. There was movement in the grass, as if someone else was watching. Another pair of eyes was there. "Did you see that?" he asked. Mwangi frowned. "See what?" John pointed with his finger to a hill just ahead. There was a silhouette, broad-shouldered. Another lion moving at a slow pace. But this one didn't look like a lioness. No, it was a male. Instinctively, they retreated. Mwangi, still holding the tip of the sile, moved behind John. "This is not good," he said in a low voice. John's eyes were still fixed. "No," he said. "This is different." The incoming lion lifted its head. He smelled it. It took a few more steps. But the interesting thing is, it didn't attack or roar. It just stood there. He walked away and disappeared, something occurred to John. "Do you think," he said hesitantly, "do you think he could be her father?" Mwangi didn't answer. Maybe yes. Maybe no. Maybe it was another story that nature had hidden within itself. Maybe they would never know. But in that moment they understood very well, all was not over. This salvation was only the first step. Survival is sometimes just the beginning. On the way back to their car, the road was covered with mud. The rain had started again, but this time the sky was lighter. As if the miracle that had just happened had emptied the clouds, when they got into the car, John leaned back. He covered his face with his hands. He closed his eyes as he leaned back against the seat. When a person locked eyes with an animal, really locked eyes, something inside him changed. And that change was silent. But it was powerful. Mwangi picked up the radio. He reported the situation. Then he turned to John. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Didn't you think of us? Your own safety." John opened his eyes. He didn't answer. He just looked out the window. Then he spoke softly. "Because if I didn't, this time I wouldn't really be able to live." One by one, the gaps in his past were closed. But this was not just the story of a man. It was the story of a mother, a cub, even a species. The survival of a lion cub meant the end of a mother's pain, the reconciliation of a human being with the past. There were no speaking characters in this story, but everyone said something. With looks, with silence, with silent thanks. When the mother lion looked back into his eyes, no words were needed. And now, as someone who is here reading, listening, feeling this story, what would you do? When a life is in your hands, would you hesitate? When an eye is begging you, "Please don't leave me," would you turn your back? Or let me put it this way, when was the last time you really looked into the eyes of a living being? Not just look, see, to feel, understand. John did that. He didn't just save a life. He pulled the child, the mistake, the conscience out of himself. And you, yes you, the person listening to this story right now, please remember that feeling, because some stories are not just told, they are lived. Thank you very much for listening to our story, for feeling it, and for coming this far. If this story touched you, if it touched your heart, write a comment, leave us your thoughts. A like, a subscribe. It may be just a click, but it is very valuable for us to share stories like this. And remember, sometimes the quietest thank you is the deepest connection. Just like a lion who says thank you without even blinking his eyes. Goodbye. Hope to meet again in a new story.